Welcome back to the channel. We'll be doing a simple history video on rare guns of World War II. I would say that most of these guns were by the Axis powers during the end of the war, when they got really desperate for weapons. Anyway, remember to like, subscribe, and let's go on with the video.
Never in the history of humankind have so many weapons been developed and produced as during
World War One and World War Two saw an increase in weapons production and in weapon types. So, and even in the technique of how the weapons were made and the advancements that were made with weapons.
War II. The hyper-production of tanks, artillery, and especially infantry weapons reached into the millions. Some of these weapons became landmarks in the history of arms. Soldiers fought in battle equipped with MP40s, Thompsons.
Well, yeah, two of the most famous guns ever. But as well, you had some. The 1911 was very popular as a sidearm as well, so. Yeah.
M1 Garand, Stens, and other legendary infantry weapons.
And a lot of the famous machine guns and submachine guns are from World War II.
On the other hand, there were also weapons that, for various reasons, were produced on a far smaller scale. Sometimes in such small numbers that they were considered a rarity, unknown to the general public.
Well, yeah, but as well, you also have to think a lot of weapons are produced in small numbers for the army, for officers alone.
Here's a list of the top 5 rare guns of World War II that you may have never heard of. Type 100. The Type 100...
Again, Axis, straight away. So the Type 100 machine gun was kind of an unreliable gun. Shooting an 8mm round, so it's not even that big of a round. So you have to think it's not going to be too powerful.
Was not only the rarest Japanese-made submachine gun, it was the only one they ever produced in any significant quantity. Quite oddly, despite the fact that submachine guns were perfect for jungle warfare in the Pacific and Southeast Asia, the Japanese felt no explicit need to introduce this type of weapon.
Which was a very strange sort of idea, but then I guess the Japanese were focusing more on trying to push them back than producing better weapons.
Into regular service. The Imperial Japanese forces had started to develop submachine guns as late as 1934, much later than any other major power.
Well, yeah, and it just meant that they didn't have a start on what was going on. They didn't know how to make them, so they just quickly tried to push them out.
Their first 2 prototypes, the experimental models 1 and 2, failed to meet military standards.
Yep.
But in 1940, the experimental Model 3 was accepted by Japanese military officials, and it entered mass production in 1940.
Even though it wasn't a very good gun, the side-mounted magazine meant that if the magazine could be hit much more easily.
42 as the submachine gun Type 100. There were 2 basic models of the Type 100. The first model, the Type 140, was a bulky weapon that fired an underpowered 8mm NAM.
It was a heavy gun for what it shot, and yeah, the round was underpowered and wouldn't reach far enough in the jungles of Southeast Asia.
Pistol round at a low rate of 450 rounds per minute. Far from being effective and prone to jamming, the Type 100 had several odd features such as a tangent rear sight.
It was one of the most unreliable submachine guns of the day, and yeah, the rear sight was rubbish. It didn't work properly.
A bayonet lug, and even a bipod in some versions. The chrome-plated barrel was one of its best features. There was also a variant of the Type 140, which was designed...
Yes, this folding stock was often used so that it could be much more handheld, but it sometimes didn't work.
For use by paratroopers that included a foldable buttstock. The second model was the Type 144, which appeared in 1944, when the Japanese decided to simplify and hasten the production process.
Well, yeah, they had to, because the Americans were getting quite close to the mainland. They had to quickly manufacture guns, which then meant that they were severely worsened, as they were already quite bad, and it just meant that they were unreliable. They would jam a lot, and they would just sometimes stop working completely.
The Type 144 was a much cruder but more reliable model. It was stripped of redundant details and had a significantly greater rate of fire at 800 rounds per minute.
And it's surprising that the worst one is the one that was made better. It was one that was meant to be made better.
Count both models of the Type 100. Only 25,000 of these submachine guns were ever produced.
As it's just a fake beam engine drive.
UD-M42. Remarkably, one of the least known
9mm, so a pistol round that doesn't go too far. Looks quite similar to a Tommy gun. 10 pounds, not too bad for a weight of a big submachine gun almost. Yeah, so 700 rounds per minute. That's quite good for 1942.
US-made submachine guns was also one of the best. The UD-M42 was a submachine gun designed by the High Standard Manufacturing Company for commercial use. When the war started, it drew the attention of the United Defense Supply Corporation. This organization was in close connection with the U.S. Secret Service.
Yes, so as well with this gun, it was probably one of the best submachine handheld machine guns of its time, and one of the lightest.
Had the intention of using the weapon for underground activities overseas. The UDSC took control of.
So in occupied France, there was a few of these around, actually, so that they could, in combat, if needed, use it.
Project and handed over production to the Marlin Company, which started the job in 1942. The most interesting feature of the UD-M42 was that it had been chambered for 9mm parabellum rounds. This caliber was unusual for the.
Yeah, it was for the US, and yes, it was actually quite good, but it didn't. But I don't think it was that powerful.
United States market, but was quite common in Europe.
Yeah.
Because the American intention was to use the weapon for resistance operations in Nazi-occupied Europe.
As I said before, and as well, the parabellum was often manufactured in France, Germany, and the UK. Because at the time, the UK was one of the largest manufacturers of guns.
Even the overall appearance of the gun gave the impression that it was designed for irregular warfare, as it lacked any unnecessary features. At the same,
it also had a very large magazine, which meant that you needed to only carry a few of them to kill multiple enemies.
At the same time, it was a high-quality weapon, made of well-machined parts, with a rate of fire of 700 rounds per minute. It was a reliable and very accurate gun that was easy to operate and easy to maintain, even in.
Anyone who had used Luger could quite easily use this sort of gun, because it had some of the similarities with pistols, and a lot of the similarities with traditional rifles and submachine guns of the time.
Harsh conditions. A curious feature was the double 25-round box magazine that allowed for quick reloads. Yet another advantage for the resistance fighters,
which I said before,
who used it. Whether it was because of the specific requisites or because of the demanding and expensive production process, there were no more than 15,000 UDM.
And actually, they killed a lot of people with only 15,000 units.
42s produced. Because of the fact that these weapons were used by the underground resistance, very few records of their use exist today. The few records that have been found document their use in the Mediterranean region.
And actually they were used in Italy itself, but there was also a few, because remember France is actually part of the Mediterranean, they actually also used that.
FG-42.
automatic rifle / light machine gun. So it uses a 7.92mm bullet. So it's not really too great. About the same weight as the previous one. Round box. So again, similar sort of magazine variant. Similar. This seems like it could be a good gun. I don't actually know this gun, which is surprising. But what I do know of it is it had a pistol grip, meaning that it could be actually fired one-handed. The stock was on the early metal, on the late it was mostly made out of wood. The gun was, and the late variant model was you actually had a bipod so it could be kept still. But I think that's all I know about this gun. The Flash and Jagger Cliff on 42, so 1942 was it when it first came out.
Among the iconic weapons in the German arsenal that were produced in the hundreds of thousands, there were also some of equal quality, made on a much smaller scale.
So yeah, I thought these were quite good quality.
One such weapon was the Fallschirmjägergewehr 42, or Paratrooper Rifle 42. A gun that was made at Hermann Göring's insistence, since he wanted his Luftwaffe paratroopers to have a better rifle than their army counterparts.
Which didn't actually make any sense. Actually, no, it did, because they were parachuting onto enemy land, so if they had multiple enemies around, then I guess they could dispose of them quicker.
The weapon was a mix of an assault rifle and a light machine gun. It was projected to be used as an assault rifle, but was chambered in the standard powerful 7.92mm cartridge.
Which meant it could actually go long distances and with quite good accuracy and power.
The FG-42 also had a sloped pistol grip, a large buttstock, and a bipod, features closer to the light machine gun concept. Even so...
But again, it was an assault rifle, which meant that it was meant to be used while moving and to be used quickly.
German paratroopers used it strictly as an assault rifle, not as a support weapon, because it was lighter than the standard Army G41 semi-automatic rifle. The FG-42 was considered to be a groundbreaking design that would eventually influence future weapons, such as the...
It actually influenced a lot of American rifles.
Sheet metal and plastic construction for the American M60 machine gun. The FG-42 was a gas-operated weapon, capable of both single shot and automatic fire.
Now, the single shot wasn't as good, but the automatic was really good. So, for those who don't know what automatic means, it means that you could press down the trigger and it would fire bullets in a stream.
Like many other German weapon designs, the FG-42 was a quality-made weapon, reliable and easy to handle. Its only drawback was the box magazine, placed on the left side of the weapon. This position caused the gun to become unbalanced.
Yeah, it was unbalanced, and an enemy could shoot it and cause some of the rounds in it to explode or to even go off
when firing bursts. Even though the FG-42 was a high-quality weapon, it was produced in a very limited quantity. Whether it was the high production costs or because German industry set their priorities to arming their regular army units, the FG-42 production was halted after only 7,000 were made. Despite being a true rarity in the vast German arsenal, this automatic rifle has earned a legendary status as one of the best weapons of the war. The most notable record of its use was during the famous Gran Sasso Raid, the airborne rescue mission of Benito Mussolini.
And I think it was one of the few times that we actually have records of mass numbers of them.
Maz 38. The FG...
One of the most famous guns ever. The Maz 38. Started in production in 1938. Ended production in 1945, I think. Or is it still in production? I can't remember. And it's a machine gun, submachine gun. It's a handheld submachine gun with actually quite a light one. It had a 32 round box, which meant that there was a lot of rounds, and it meant they could easily be used. The 7.65 Lange, I don't recognise that caliber, and rate of fire 600, pretty normal.
42 may have been the weapon that saved Mussolini's life, but it was the French Maz 38 submachine gun that allegedly ended it.
Yes.
One of the Italian partisans that participated in the execution of the dictator was armed with the Maz 38, a relatively unknown submachine gun of World War II.
Yeah.
The Maz 38
but it's extremely famous.
The project of the famous French Saint-Étienne weapons manufacturing company. The development program lasted for several years until it was finalized in 1938 with a design that was ahead of its time.
Oh yeah, definitely. So it was one of them. So this gun has actually inspired a lot of modern guns with their design.
The client who ordered it, the French army, decided not to purchase the weapon. However, once the war started, the French urged the factory to produce the gun in the highest quantities possible.
Yes.
But it was too late. The Maz 38 was a quality weapon made of parts machined from solid metal, which made it very durable, but also very expensive.
Which meant, and I think the company actually went out of business when they were making it because of how expensive they were to make and how the rounds weren't widely used.
It also required many production hours, too many to produce a large quantity of guns in a short amount of time.
Yes.
What made the Maz 38 distinctive to other designs at the time was that it was devoid of all unnecessary features.
I think it only had the rear sight as an iron sight, and that was it. I think it had a rail. It didn't even have a rail, which in modern terms is really rare. But I think it only had a rear and front sight, and that was all it really had. It was the bare bones of a gun.
Bipod, bayonet fitting, muzzle brake, or any other feature that the majority of submachine guns had. The Maz 38 was a small weapon with a recoil spring housed inside a wooden buttstock. It was compact and very easy to handle. The only real problem was that it used the notorious 7.65 mm.
That was what I was talking about. It was a big problem for it.
Longue cartridge, which was a pistol round used exclusively in France.
There we go.
Because of the late start of production, less than 2,000 Maz 38 submachine guns were produced by the beginning of the war. In 1940, the German army captured the Maz factory and continued the gun's production, but its use was limited to France because of its unique chambering. The guns were distributed.
It was because of that it was meant that it was pretty useless. It was only going to be used during occupied France, and it was going to be used by the Nazis, not even the resistance.
Mainly to police units and German garrisons during the occupation of France. Some did find their way to nearby countries, such as Italy, but in general, the Maz 38 was a true rarity during the war. Delisle carbine. Compared to weapons produced in the hundreds of thousands during the war, those made in a few thousand units were considered a rarity. Still, there were service weapons that were produced on an even smaller scale of around 100 units.
This is one of them. I think that, this only had 100 units in total. And 7-round box, it wasn't really good. It wasn't really a good gun. Like, for the masses, it wouldn't have been good.
This was the case with the British Delisle carbine. The Delisle carbine didn't begin in the Project Bureau, but in the home of an engineer and gun enthusiast, William Godfrey Delisle. He had made his first suppressed carbine in the .22 caliber for hunting small game.
And this one was in the 0.42 or 42, and it just meant that it was it's a good round. It's just not something which most people would use.
In early 1943, news of this innovative carbine reached the Combined Operation Headquarters of the British War Office. Yep. Major Sir Malcolm Campbell invited Delisle to bring the carbine to his office, where he got acquainted with its most impressive feature.
And because it's already it's an inbuilt suppressor, it actually means that it could be used for taking down targets silently, such as high level officers who could then be killed almost silently.
It's near silent operation. This was the beginning of a cooperation that resulted in the first prototype. The .45 ACP caliber Delisle carbine passed its testing with the highest grades. It produced no muzzle flash and was completely silent at a distance of 50 yards or 46 meters. Major Campbell was thrilled and ordered more to be made. Delisle was then transferred to the Ford Dagenham factory in London that was hired for production. The first phase.
And it had a small magazine, but it wasn't used that much, and it also was only used for high-profile targets.
These ended in only 17 handmade carbines, constructed by using parts from other weapons.
17.
The base was a shortened Lee Enfield Mark III rifle stock with a locking mechanism. The bolt and receiver were modified for .45 caliber rounds and were fitted with an altered Thompson submachine gun barrel, while the magazine was taken from a Colt M1911 pistol.
Makes sense.
The most unique feature was its integrated 15-inch long suppressor, Delisle's own invention. The initial batch of 17 carbines was immediately deployed to commando units. The weapon was officially accepted into service in 1944, after a series of comparison tests with suppressed Sten guns were made.
Which is what I said, that it was used for high-level and infiltration units.
The contract was given to the Sterling Armaments Company to produce 500 carbines, but by the end of the war they managed to produce only 130. The Sterling version was different from the original in several...
It had a metal stock, it was shorter and a bit heavier, I think.
Features, most notable of which were Sterling Armaments Company to produce... Most notable of which were an added pistol grip and a foldable buttstock. The Delisle carbines were used exclusively by British commando units, though a few found their way into the hands of operatives from the Special Operations Executive.
Well, of course they would. Almost every rifle did.
Nature of their operations, there are very few records of where these carbines were used. Though sidelined from the main course of events, these rare guns of World War II nevertheless made their way into the history of small arms. It was only a set of circumstances rather than their quality.
Anyway, it's the end of the video, so remember to like and subscribe and all that, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.